When the framers of our sat down in 1946, they were not merely drafting a document, they were building a delicate equation between unity and liberty, between the center and the states, between the idea of India and the geography of India. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar stood before the assembly and said, India is to be a union of states, a federation not because the states have agreed to join, but because the constitution itself has created the union. That one sentence holds the riddle of Indian federalism. We are a federation without a federal impulse, a union born not out of voluntary compact but of constitutional command. And yet, 75 years later, that union is on trial because the question that now haunts our democracy is not who governs India, but from where is India being governed. Let's talk about the original version. The word federal never appears in the constitution, and that's not an accident. The framers were deeply aware of the trauma of partition, the danger of centrifugal forces, the scars of communal division, and the urgency of national unity. So they built a structure that was federal in form, unitary in spirit. As Ambedkar put it, it is not our intention to make the states mere administrative units. They are to have constitutional powers. But their union must remain strong enough to prevent disintegration. It was a masterstroke, an attempt to create both strength and sensitivity. But like all masterstrokes, it carried within it a flaw. The concentration of power at the center could, over time, distort the equilibrium. What began as a safety mechanism gradually became a habit, and today that habit has evolved into a culture, the culture of centralization. So let's talk about the federal spirit weakens. Let's look around. Governors dismissing elected state governments, agencies like the CBI and ED entering state jurisdictions without consent, central schemes dictating how states spend money on health, education, or agriculture, a council of ministers in Delhi deciding what textbooks a classroom in Kerala or Nagaland will use. And here's the deeper irony. All this is happening under the constitutional banner of cooperative federalism. But as Chief Justice D.Y. Chanchud said in the 2023 NCT of Delhi verdict, the principles of federalism and democracy are interlinked. Centralized administration of states destroy accountability at the local level. In other words, when the center rules from a distance, democracy suffocates on the ground. So what was the founding anxiety? We often forget that the original Indian federation was designed as a response to the fear of fragmentation. The British India provinces had grown used to autonomy. Princely states had tasted sovereignty. The new union had to bind them without letting them break away. Ambedkar's insistence on strong central powers, especially over finance, emergency, and legislation, made sense in that fragile moment of national building. But he also warned, and this is crucial, quote, strong center does not mean absolute center. Strength must serve liberty, not suppress it, unquote. This right here is the philosophical core of federalism. Power must have purpose, and purpose must have restraint. So what is federalism as political temperament? Here's the thing. Federalism is not just about the division of powers. It's about the distribution of respect. It's about recognizing that India is not one civilization. It is a civilization of civilizations. As Granville Austin wrote in the Indian Constitution, cornerstone of a nation, federalism in India was intended to be cooperative and not competitive. But cooperation requires trust, and trust cannot survive surveillance. When states are treated as extension of the center, when every policy is pushed through tied grants or conditions, when the language of governance becomes one nation, one X, what we are witnessing is not unity. It is uniformity masquerading as unity. The Republic begins to tilt from being a United States to a union over states. Let's talk about the centralizing era. Let's call things by their names. Centralization in India today isn't accidental. It is structural, fiscal, and ideological. Structurally, the center controls the All India services, key appointments, and the governor's office. Fiscally, after the introduction of the GST, states lost direct control over their revenue sources. And ideologically, the center increasingly defines national interest in ways that leave little room for regional distinctiveness. In 2018, the Supreme Court in State, NCT of Delhi versus Union of India, said the union and the state must embrace a collaborative federal architecture. The spirit of federalism demands a sharing of power, not a usurpation of it. That word, usurpation, is important. It implies that what was once a constitutional balance is now being overstepped, not by law, but by habit. Let's talk about the present day flashpoints. Consider recent events: Tamil Nadu and Kerala questioning the withholding of funds, Punjab challenging the governor's refusal to summon the assembly, Delhi battling for control over its officers despite an elected government and the Supreme Court's verdict, Maharashtra witnessing regime change under opaque constitutional maneuvers. Each of these is not just a political episode, each is a constitutional stress test. And the results are in. The stress is winning. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin called it, quote, the silent hollowing out of Indian federalism, unquote. Mamata Banerjee calls it, quote, the rule of the Raj through modern means, unquote. Even Justice R.F. Nariman, speaking after retirement, warned, the greatest danger to the Indian Republic is the gradual erosion of state autonomy under the cloak of cooperative federalism, unquote. Next is the federal imbalance. Why does this matter? Because the health of a democracy is measured not by the power of its center, but by the freedom of its peripheries. If every decision flows downward from Delhi, then the Indian citizen in Madurai, Imphal or Ahmedabad becomes a spectator, not a participant in governance. Ambedkar had anticipated this also. He said, quote, the distribution of powers must not merely be a matter of drafting. It must be a matter of habit, unquote. Federalism, he believed, must be a living practice, not a frozen clause. But we have reversed the formula. We have made federalism a ritual of consultation, not a right of governance. Now let's set the stage for the trial. So here's where this investigation begins. In the next parts, we will examine the constitutional blueprint, the great judgments, the political responses, the philosophical future of federalism in India. We will put the Republic's balance of power under a constitutional microscope. We will ask, when the center and the states clash, who really speaks for the people? When the constitution is silent, who interprets the silence? The judiciary or the electorate? And finally, when power travels upward faster than accountability travels downward, what remains of the word federal? This is not a debate about structure, it is a trial about soul, because the question that now echoes across the Republic is simple but searing. Has the Indian Union become too strong for its own democracy? Next part is about the philosophy, what federalism really means. Federalism is one of those words we repeat without reflection. It appears in every political speech, every state protest, every legal argument. But pause for a moment. What does federalism actually mean in the Indian imagination? Is it a technical arrangement of power between Delhi and the states? Or is it a moral code, a way of recognizing that India can only exist if differences can coexist? The truth is, federalism in India is not a copy of the American model. It was never meant to be. In America, the states came first, the union came later. In India, the union came first. The states were drawn inside it. That one historical reversal changed everything. Let's talk about Ambedkar's design, which is union first but not unitary. On November 4, 1948, introducing the draft constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said, the draft constitution is federal in structure but with a strong center. The union is indestructible, but the states are not. Yet the power of the union is not absolute. It is bound by the constitution itself. This sentence captures the Indian genius. A system unitary in crisis, federal in normalcy. Ambedkar and his peers were not knaves. They had seen partition. They had seen provinces crumble. They wanted unity, yes, but not uniformity. So they built a constitution that breathes, elastic, adaptive, strong, but never rigid. Ambedkar once warned, quote, do not mistake a strong center for a sovereign center, unquote. The distinction between strong and sovereign is what refines and defines our republic. Federalism is a trust, not geography. Let's discuss that. People often mistake federalism for geography, as if it's just about borders, boundaries, and jurisdictions. But federalism is not about where power lies. It's about how power behaves. You can draw perfect lines on a map and still destroy the spirit of the constitution if the behavior of power becomes monopolistic. Federalism is built on trust, not territory. states are not fiefdom of chaos. The states must trust that the center is not an empire. When the trust breaks, the republic becomes brittle, no matter how thick the constitutional parchment. Next, discuss the logic of shared sovereignty. Modern political theory rests on a simple fiction that sovereignty is indivisible, but India proved that fiction wrong. Here, sovereignty is layered. It's not one voice, but a chorus of jurisdictions. The Union controls defense, foreign affairs, currency. The states governs health, police, agriculture, education, and the constitution mediates the conversation between them. This is not divisions, it's distribution with dialogue. Justice Ahmadi in S.R. Bommai vs. Union of India 1994 case said, "Federalism in India is not a matter of administrative convenience, but one of the democratic necessity." Unquote. He was right. Federalism is not only a mechanism through which democracy in a continent-sized nation can stay alive. If India were truly unitary, democracy would collapse under its own size. If India were purely confederal, unity would evaporate into chaos. So our founders created a delicate paradox, a centralized democracy designed to decentralize power. Next, let's discuss the soul of cooperative federalism. Federalism was never meant to be adversarial. It was meant to be cooperative, a conversation, not a competition. But cooperation requires humility, and humility is the rarest currency in politics. The Sarkaria Commission in 1988 put it beautifully, quote, "The success of our federal structure depends not on the rigidity of the constitution, but on the maturity of those who walk it," unquote. In other words, you can't legislate maturity, you can only practice it. That's why constitutional design is only half the battle. Constitutional temperament is the other half. When both sides, center and states, forget their temperament, federalism collapses into litigation. And litigation, as we have seen again and again, becomes a substitute for negotiation. Next, let's discuss federalism as a shield of liberty. We often think of federalism as a technical safeguard against tyranny, but it's actually a philosophical shield for liberty. By dispersing power, it prevents concentration. By allowing regional diversity, it preserves individual identity. In that sense, federalism is the architecture of freedom. Justice Khanna said, the same judge who stood alone in ADM Jabalpur vs. Shivkant Shukla once wrote, quote, "Constitution, centralization is not unity, it is a uniformity of silence," unquote. And that's the danger. When power becomes centralized, dissent becomes disorder. Dialogue becomes defiance, and democracy becomes decoration. Federalism ensures that doesn't happen. It is the system's internal opposition. It's built in conscience. Now let's discuss India's federalism versus Western models. Let's not pretend our federalism mimics the West. Ours is not dual federalism like the US. It's what scholars call cooperative or symmetrical federalism, meaning not all states are equal and not all powers are fixed. Jammu and Kashmir once had Article 370. The Northeast still enjoys Article 371 provisions. Union territories evolve into states. States can be reorganized. The Constitution didn't freeze India, it made it fluid. That's why even after 75 years, India continues to redraw itself legally, linguistically, and administratively. Federalism in India is not a frozen map, it's a living argument. Now let's discuss the moral question, power or partnership. Here's the real question, should federalism be seen as constraint on national unity or as a condition for genuine unity? Because unity by command is not unity. It's compliance, unity through partnership, through mutual respect that sustains nations. Ambedkar once said during the assembly debates, quote, "Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of its social democracy." By that I mean a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality and fraternity as principles of life, unquote. Federalism in a sense is fraternity institutionalized. It's how 1,000 Indians become one India, not by surrender, but by synthesis. Now let's discuss the crisis of federal temperament. Constitutional design hasn't failed. What's failing is the federal temperament. When the center sees every dissenting chief minister as a threat, when the states see every central scheme as intrusion, when governors behave like political operatives, that's not constitutional decay, that's moral decay. Justice Sawant in Bommai warned, Quote, the constitution has created a union of unequal partners, but it demands that inequality never become humiliation. Unquote. Yet, humiliation is precisely what modern federalism often produces. Fiscal dependency, partisan governors, weaponized agencies, all are symptoms of a deeper illness, the absence of trust. And once trust dies, the constitution becomes a manual, not a covenant. So what does federalism really mean? It means believing that India is not a single will. It's a conversation of millions. It means recognizing that governance is not control, it's coordination. And it means remembering that the Republic's unity is not something to enforce, but something to earn every single day. Federalism in the end is not about Delhi or the states. It's about the character of power itself, whether we use it to dominate or to dignify. Because when power forgets to share, the Republic forgets to breathe. Next part of this lecture is about the blueprint of power, the constitutional architecture. Every republic has a skeleton. Ours is the constitution, and if we were to x-ray its bones, we would see the tension between two impulses, control and consent. Federalism in India is not just a matter of dividing powers. It's a philosophy disguised as a framework, an arrangement crafted to balance unity with freedom and a national purpose with local voice. To understand how this balance was designed and how it has since tilted, we must start at the beginning. Now let's discuss the three lists. The seventh schedule divides the power of governance into three lists: the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. It sounds clean, but it isn't, because even at the drafting stage, the center was granted more authority than the states ever could claim. The union list has 97 subjects, covering defense, foreign affairs, banking, atomic energy, interstate trade, and so on. The state list just 66 subjects, including public order, police, health, and agriculture, and the concurrent list 47 subjects, shared by both. And here's the catch. Article 254 says that if a central and a state law conflict on a concurrent subject, the central law prevails. So in practice, even shared power leans upwards. Ambedkar defended this asymmetry. He said in the assembly, in times of emergency or instability, the center must be capable of ensuring that the life of the nation is not endangered by the failure of any single state. He wasn't wrong, but what he built for emergencies, politics later used as convenience. Now let's discuss the emergency powers. Nowhere is this clearer than in the emergency provisions. Article 352, 356 and 360. These are the pressure balls of the Indian Union, and each of them transfers power overnight from the states to the center. Article 352, National Emergency. Once acclaimed, the federal structure collapses into a unitary one. Parliament can legislate on any matter, including those in the state list. The Union Executive gains absolute control. Article 356, President's Rule. The center assumes the functions of a state government if it believes that constitutional machinery has failed. The single article has been the most politically abused clause in the entire constitution. Between 1950 and 1994, it was invoked more than 90 times. From Kerala in 1959 to Andhra Pradesh in 1984, from Uttar Pradesh to Tamil Nadu, elected governments were dismissed, often for political reasons, not constitutional ones. And when questioned, the answer was always the same. We are acting in the national interest. Article 360, Financial Emergency, has never been invoked, but its shadow hangs over the fiscal life of the Republic because it allows the center to control state expenditures and salaries, effectively reducing them to administrative branches. Ambedkar, aware of this potential, had said, quote, if these emergency powers are misused, it would be the worst form of centralization. But we have to trust the man who will use them, unquote. 75 years later, that trust has become the debate itself. Next, let's discuss the role of the governor. If there is one office that perfectly symbolizes the federal paradox, it is the governor, appointed by the president, answerable to center, but expected to act as the constitutional head of a state. In theory, the governor is meant to be a bridge, a dignified link between two layers of government. In practice, the office often behaves like a political checkpoint. From dismissals of ministries in the 1950s to delays in signing bills into the 2020s, the governor has become the center's constitutional instrument. The Sarkaria Commission in 1988 warned against this. It said, the governor should be an elder statesman, not an agent of the union. But The recommendation remains a footnote in Indian federal history. Even recently, in the Punjab and Tamil Nadu disputes, the Supreme Court had to remind governors of their limited role. Quote, a governor is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. He cannot act as an adversary to an elected government. Unquote. Yet, the friction continues, proving that the constitutional blueprint, while clear on paper, is easily bent by political convenience. Now let's discuss the fiscal federalism. No federal structure can survive without financial autonomy, and in India, money flows upward and back downward through conditions, formulas, and approvals. The Constitution's Article 268 to 281 deal with the division of revenue. Taxes like customs, income tax, corporate tax go to the center. States rely on grants, loans, and finance commissions recommendations. This design was meant to ensure equality, but it also created dependency. With the GST regime introduced in 2017, states surrendered most of their indirect tax powers. They now depend on the center for compensation. When that compensation is delayed, as it was during the pandemic, states effectively lose their fiscal oxygen. Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan called it a fiscal straitjacket. Tamil Nadu's finance minister used stronger words. Quote, cooperative federalism has become coercive federalism. Unquote. The 10th Finance Commission once warned, if fiscal centralization continues, it will convert states into mere implementing agencies of national schemes. Unquote. That prophecy has aged well, unfortunately. Next, let's discuss the judiciary's federal compass. The Supreme Court has often acted as the moral referee of this federal tug-of-war. In S.R. Bombay vs. Union of India 1994 case, the court laid down historic guardrails. President's rule cannot be used for political gain. The proclamation must be based on objective material, and the majority of a state government should be tested on the floor of the assembly, not in the governor's report. Justice Sawant in their judgment said, quote, federalism is part of basic structure of the constitution. The states are not mere appendages of the center. Unquote. That single line restored dignity to state governments after decades of abuse. But judicial declarations alone can't undo political instincts. Because the real struggle of Indian federalism is not about written constitution. It's about constitutional culture. Now let's discuss the idea behind the architecture. Let's step back. What were the framers truly trying to build? Ambedkar envisioned a union strong enough to prevent secession, but sensitive enough to preserve diversity. K.M. Munshi wanted a single political nation but multiple administrative freedoms. Nehru in his letters argued for a planned unity, not mechanical uniformity. They all understood something timeless, that the integrity of India depended not on the dominance of Delhi, but on the confidence of the states. Federalism was not designed to fragment India, it was designed to stabilize power by distributing it. Now let's discuss the federal philosophy. At its heart, federalism is an act of restraint. It's a promise that the center will govern without swallowing, and the states will assert without seceding. It's a discipline, and disciplines must be renewed. As the late Justice P.N. Bhagwati once wrote, constitutional morality requires the exercise of power within self-imposed limits. Unquote. That line should be engraved on every office in New Delhi and every secretariat across the nation. Because the moment power stops respecting boundaries, democracy starts resembling domination. Now let's discuss the cracks begin to show. By 1970s, the blueprint began to fray. The center had started using emergency provisions, governor's discretion and fiscal levers to tighten its hold. What had begun as a union of equals started looking like a pyramid of control. The real test and the real transformation came when the courts, the parliament and the politics collided over who truly embodies the will of the people. Next part of this lecture is about the constitutional crisis and clashes. Every constitution faces moments when paper burns and principle is tested. For India, those moments came in waves. They came disguised as amendments, emergencies, and judicial pronouncements. And at the center of it all, a single question: when Parliament and the judiciary disagree, who truly speaks for the people? This, I guess, we have discussed in the earlier lecture on the Parliament versus judiciary. We will discuss this, skip this part, and we will begin the next part. Now we will skip directly to the next part: political responses. Parliament strikes back. Every time the court asserts itself, Parliament feels its pulse quicken. And every time Parliament expands its power, the court draws the line in the sand. But it's not just legal tension. It's ego, ideology, and legacy. Let's trace how political India answered judicial India. Let's begin with Indira Gandhi, the supremacy of the ballot. For Indira Gandhi, the legitimacy of parliament came from the vote, not from judicial sermons. After the Golaknath and Kesavrinda Bharati rulings, she didn't hide her disdain. In a 1975 speech, she said, "Judges are not elected, they cannot know the will of the people better than those who represent them." To her, Parliament wasn't just a lawmaking body. It was the moral will of the India's poor. It's hungry, it's hopeful. So when the Supreme Court said even Parliament had limits, she saw it as an insult to democracy itself. But here is the paradox. In defending Parliament's supremacy, she undermined its very spirit by centralizing power, suspending dissent, and choking the very democracy she claimed to represent. The political moral. When leaders equate themselves with the nation, constitutional limits start looking like personal insults. The next is Rajiv Gandhi, the technocrat's dilemma. Rajiv Gandhi inherited both power and distrust. He wanted to modernize governance, digitize bureaucracy, and decentralize power through the 73rd and 74th Amendments. Yet, when the judiciary began striking down executive actions, his government toyed with constitutional amendments to curb judicial activism. He famously said in the parliament, "We respect the judiciary, but the will of people must prevail." Unquote. Translation: we will obey the law as long as it doesn't inconvenience us. It was the same old wound, now dressed in modern clothes. Next is P.V. Narasimha Rao, the federal reformer. Rao, a constitutionalist to the bone, quietly recalibrated India's federal grammar. He gave economic liberalization a political shield, letting states experiment while keeping Delhi's grip intact through fiscal control and party discipline. He once told his aides, half-jokingly, quote, "A real federalism is not in the constitution, it's in how we manage Delhi," unquote. That one line explains India's paradox. Federalism is a structure of restraint, but politics is an instinct of dominance. Next is Vajpayee, the poet of consensus. Atal Bihari Vajpayee understood federalism as poetry, not policy. He said in the parliament, "The center must be strong, but strength without sensitivity is tyranny." Under him, coalition politics matured. Regional parties were no longer irritants. They were co-authors of governance. He used persuasion where others used ordinance, and that restored a bit of constitutional balance, even if only temporarily. Vajpayee's politics showed that federalism doesn't need new laws, it needs new temperament. Next is Arun Jaitley, the modern federal realist. Fast forward to the Modi era. Arun Jaitley, both lawyer and minister, became the intellectual bridge between political authority and constitutional literacy. He said in Rajya Sabha debate, quote, "The basic structure doctrine, while noble, has at times converted judicial review into judicial veto," unquote. He wasn't attacking the judiciary. He was articulating the political frustration of being elected yet restrained. In one essay, he warned, quote, "If courts strike down every reform in the name of basic structure, we risk judicial tyranny replacing parliamentary supremacy," unquote. This was a refined version of Indira Gandhi's argument, less emotional, more institutional. And in that evolution lies the story of India's maturing federal consciousness. Now let's discuss the Chief Minister's chorus, federalism as resistance. Listen to what India's chief ministers have been saying over the last 2 decades, and you hear a chorus of the same grievance. Delhi does not trust the state. From Mamata Banerjee to M.K. Stalin, from KCR to Arvind Kejriwal, each has accused the center of turning cooperative federalism into command federalism. Kejriwal said, "They want the people to elect us but not empower us," unquote. Mamata called it, quote, "a new colonialism through agencies and budgets," unquote. These aren't mere complaints, they are constitutional cries. Because the Constitution promised union of states, not states of the union. The subtext of every CM's protest is this: federalism isn't a gift from Delhi, it's the right of the states. Next, let's discuss the Law Commission and the committees. The quiet thinkers. While politicians traded barbs, the Law Commissions quietly drafted the Republic's conscience. The 42nd Law Commission report of 1971 warned against excessive centralization. The Sarkaria Commission of 1983 to 1988 recommended clear boundaries between union and the state function. The Punchi Commission of 2010 revisited those boundaries, cautioning that federal stress was reaching breaking point. Each report said, in essence, Federalism is India's safety valve, ignore it, and the Republic overheats, unquote. Yet their reports gather dust while political speeches gather applause. So what is the people's verdict beyond institutions? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Neither parliament nor the judiciary truly speaks for the people anymore. They speak for themselves. One in the name of mandate, the other in the name of morality. The real sovereign, the citizen, is often the spectator. Federalism was supposed to be about shared power. Instead, it's become about shared helplessness. And that brings us to the next act, where Republic asks, can the idea of India's unity survive without its diversity of power? Because without real federalism, democracy becomes administration, not participation. The next part is about the politics of centralization. The Indian Constitution was written as a pact between power and principle. But every few decades, one side forgets the pact. Since 2014, a new story has taken hold. One that calls itself One Nation. One nation, one tax, one nation, one election, one nation, one language, one nation, one digital identity. It sounds efficient, it sounds patriotic. But underneath that efficiency lies a deeper anxiety, the anxiety of control. Because every slogan of oneness carries a quiet subtraction of difference, of dissent, of dialogue. Now let's discuss the rise of unitary nationalism. Let's be honest, the 2014 political wave didn't just change the government, it changed the grammar of governance. Federalism, which once meant the sharing of power, was now recast as fragmentation. The union became protagonist and states became supporting characters. The center spoke the languages of integration, but it acted through instruments of supervision. You hear it in the rhetoric of the new India: strong leadership, streamlined administration, singular identity. It's a kind of unitary nationalism, a model where unity is not the sum of diversity, but the erasure of it. And yet, the irony is sharp. The stronger the center becomes, the weaker of this idea of national balance gets. Because the more you centralize, the more you alienate. Now let's discuss the de facto expansion of central agencies and governors. Every era creates its own instruments of authority. In the 1970s, it was the emergency. In the 1980s, it was president's rule. In 2020s, it's about the alphabet soup of agencies: CBI, ED, NIA, NCB. Today, these institutions don't just investigate crime, they discipline politics. A chief minister's ally turns hostile. A notice arrives and an opposition party questions policy. A summon follows. Constitutional accountability becomes political choreography. Even the office of the governor, once ceremonial, has turned quasi-political. From Maharashtra to Tamil Nadu, Kerala to West Bengal, governors have become the new viceroys, withholding bills, delaying assent, and publicly rebuking elected governments. M.K. Stalin said in January 2023, quote, "Governors are acting as if they are the center's agents, not constitutional guardians," unquote. Mamata Banerjee equally blunt, quote, "The Raj Bhavan has become BJP's outpost," unquote. K. Chandrasekhar Rao warned, quote, "India is drifting towards a unitary state. Federalism is being bulldozed in broad daylight," unquote. Each of these voices comes from a different political ideology, yet they echo the same alarm. That's not coincidence. That's the sound of the Republic's nervous system. Now let's discuss the coercion of fiscal federalism. If political federalism is being weakened by agencies, economic federalism is being squeezed by arithmetic. The 14th Finance Commission promised states 42% devolution of central taxes. On paper, that looked like progress. But in reality, more than half of that money comes back tied with strings: centrally sponsored schemes, performance-based incentives, conditional grants. So while the numbers rose, the freedom fell. States get the money but not the mandate. They must implement central schemes with a brand, central branding, central targets, and central auditing. Tamil Nadu's finance minister once quipped, quote, "They give us 42%, then take 30% back in control," unquote. This is the new fiscal coercion, not through denial, but through design. It's the economics of obedience. And in a republic that prides itself on cooperative federalism, it's cooperation without equality, a polite form of domination. Now let's discuss digital centralization, the New Delhi. Now, centralization does not always arrive in uniforms. Sometimes it arrives in code. Digital governance, once sold as empowerment, has quietly become the new architecture of central control. Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, GSTN, all roads lead to national databases controlled by the center. States depend on Delhi's APIs, Delhi servers, Delhi's rules. It's efficient, yes, but it's also asymmetric. In a digital republic, data is power, and whoever owns the data governs the future. The idea of decentralization, Panchayati Raj, local governance, state innovation is being replaced by a top-down algorithmic order. Digital India is in truth a digital Delhi. Next is linguistic and educational centralization. Language is the soul of federalism, and education is the transmission of that soul. But over the last decade, both have been recast in the mold of uniformity. The push for Hindi as lingua franca has sparked cultural pushback from the south and the northeast. As Stalin said, quote, "We are Indians not because we speak one language, but because we share one destiny," unquote. Yet, linguistic diversity is being reframed as inefficiency, as if many tongues weaken the republic. In education, the National Education Policy 2020 centralizes curricula, pedagogies and regulatory control. States can adapt but not design. Even history textbooks are being rewritten in Delhi, not by historians but by committees. This is not educational reform, it is narrative consolidation. When you control what a generation learns, you don't need to control what they vote for. Next, let's discuss the philosophy of power. The politics of centralization always hides behind noble slogans: uniformity, efficiency, integration, security. But behind each lies a moral gamble that the country is too fragile to trust its people. The founding fathers didn't build India on that fear. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly, "Our federalism is a union because it is indestructible, not because it is inflexible," unquote. That was the key. Indestructible but not inflexible, strong enough to hold yet open enough to breathe. The tragedy of modern centralization is that it confuses strength with stiffness. It mistakes command for cohesion. And in that mistake, the republic starts shrinking, not in geography, but in spirit. Discuss the question we must ask. So the question isn't whether India should be strong. The question is, whose strength defines that strength? Is unity built on shared purpose or on shared submission? Can a republic that silences its regions still call itself democratic? Because the true test of power is not how tightly you hold, but how gracefully you share. Next part is federalism as a living covenant. Every generation believes it understands the constitution, but few understand that the constitution was never meant to be finished. Federalism, above all, is proof of that. It isn't a design frozen in 1950, it's a living covenant, a relationship that must be renewed, tested, and redefined with every era. Now let's discuss the world's three mirrors: America, Canada, and Germany. When we speak of federalism, we often measure ourselves against three models: the American, the Canadian, and the German. Each represents a different philosophy of power. In the United States, the states created the union. Power flows upward from the people of each state to a common federal compact. It's a model of contractual federalism, born out of rebellion against a monarch. The union exists because the states consented. In Canada, the story reverses. Canada's federation was born in fear of fragmentation. The British North America Act of 1867 deliberately made the center dominant, not out of arrogance, but out of anxiety. So Canada practices quasi-federalism, where the center's powers can override the provinces in emergencies. In Germany, federalism is more moral before it is administrative. After the collapse of the Nazi regime, Germany famous saw centralization as a moral corruption. They built what they call Bundesstaat, a federation where states participate in federal lawmaking through the Bundesrat. It's a system of shared sovereignty. Each level restrains the other. Now India sits somewhere between all three: the strength of Canada, the diversity of America, and the cooperative institutionalism of Germany. But fused with something none of them have: civilizational pluralism. Our federalism is not merely political, it is civilizational federalism, a pact between languages, histories, and a way of life that predate the republic itself. Next is the Ambedkar's warning, the threat within. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar once warned the assembly, "The threat to liberty often comes from the center, not the periphery," unquote. It was not a slogan, it was a prophecy. Ambedkar understood power psychology, that the center, by virtue of its machinery, its pulse, and its proximity to the armed forces, will always be tempted to confuse unity with uniformity. He saw how the rhetoric of national interest can mask the erosion of federal trust. He knew that centralization rarely arrives with fanfare. It creeps in through ordinances, fiscal control, and the slow suffocation of dissent. That's why Ambedkar's design placed federal liberty not in the text alone, but in the spirit and in the habits of restraint and respect that no clause can enforce. Because federalism, in its truest form, is not a technical device, it's a moral device against the arrogance of power. Next, let's discuss from rhetoric to redesign. The phrase cooperative federalism has become a political slogan. Everyone uses it, few mean it. If cooperative federalism is to survive, it needs institutional redesign, not just poetic endorsement. Here's what that means. First, fiscal cooperation must become predictive, not performative. The GST Council, for instance, cannot be a stage where the center performs consultation only to dictate outcomes. True cooperation means co-decision, not co-listening. Second, India needs a federal council, a constitutional body for continuous dialogue between the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers, insulated from partisan calculation, not Niti Aayog style adversaries, but a chamber of shared accountability. Third, state capacity must be treated as a national capacity. We can't have a $5 trillion economy if state institutions are starved of funds, talent, or trust. Fourth, regional political diversity must be seen as strength, the laboratory of democracy, not its nuisance. Cooperation cannot be achieved through slogans. It has to be built into the machinery of governance so that disagreement becomes dialogue, not defection. Next, let's discuss the twin conditions. Federal balance depends on two fragile virtues: judicial restraint and political maturity. The judiciary is often called upon to police the boundaries of federalism, from S.R. Bommai to NCT of Delhi. But courts can only interpret, they cannot cultivate federal culture. If the judiciary becomes the daily referee of center-state conflicts, it signals not constitutional strength but political bankruptcy. Judicial intervention must be principled, not paternal. Its role is to preserve the framework, not to run the federation. The other half of the equation is political maturity, the willingness to lose power gracefully, to share credit honestly, and to treat dissent not as disloyalty but as a dialogue. Justice Chanchud once wrote that, quote, "Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment, it has to be cultivated," unquote. That is true of federal morality too. Without that maturity, no amendment or judgment can save federalism from decay. Now let's discuss the Republic as many sovereignties. The Republic of India is not merely one constitution, it is many sovereignties learning to coexist. Each village that governs itself, each state that shapes its policies, each citizen who asserts her dignity is a fragment of that shared sovereignty. Federalism then is not an arrangement between governments, it is a covenant between conscience, a recognition that unity must be negotiated, not imposed. In every generation, this covenant will be tested by centralizing temptations, by political vanity, by the fatigue of cooperation. And yet, the strength of the Republic will never lie in the might of the capital, but in the consent of its margins. That's what Ambedkar meant when he spoke of liberty's threat coming from the center. He wasn't warning Delhi, he was warning us. Because the health of federation is measured but by how power is shared, without fear, without favor, without the need of dominance. The Republic endures not because power is centralized, but because sovereignty is shared. In the next part, let's discuss the future, reclaiming federalism. So what must change? What does it mean to reclaim federalism? Not just defend it. First, the Finance Commission must evolve. For decades, devolution has been calculated by population, by income, by macroeconomic formulas, but not by constitutional empathy. The next commission must measure not merely numbers but needs. States with fragile geographies, historical deprivation, or cultural obligations require tailored fiscal treatment. Otherwise, the very principle of equity is lost in the arithmetic of averages. When Ambedkar said India would be a union of states, he never meant uniformity of development. He meant the equal dignity of every region's aspirations. A tribal district in Chhattisgarh, a coastal block in Kerala, a flood-prone village in Assam, each must be seen not as a statistic but as a sovereign claimant to justice. Second, the Interstate Council must be resurrected. Created under Article 263, it was meant to be a constitutional safety valve, a place where grievances could be voiced before they became constitutional crises. Yet for years, it has slept in bureaucratic coma. Under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, it showed promise. Dialogue, transparency, debate, Since then, silence. If India truly believes in cooperative federalism, this council must be institutionalized, not politicized. It should meet quarterly, have permanent staff, and publish binding recommendations, a federal conscience that keeps the union humane. Third, the office of the governor must be reformed. For too long, it has become an instrument of political intrusion. Ambedkar himself warned that the governor was never meant to be a party's agent. He was to be the constitutional sentinel of the state, not a political supervisor. It's time the process of gubernatorial appointments became consultative. Chief ministers must have a say, not veto but voice, because a governor who commands no trust cannot preserve constitutional balance. And finally, the Supreme Court must interpret federalism as living constitutional morality, not static textualism. Federalism is not a clause in a constitution, it's character. It breathes through every article from 73rd to 371, from fiscal autonomy to linguistic rights. The court must reaffirm what Justice P.V. Sawant once said, quote, "In a federal constitution, liberty depends on the vitality of states," unquote. Judiciary cannot claim silent when the balance of power erodes in slow motion. It must treat federalism as a continuing guarantee of democracy, not merely a structure of convenience between governments. Federalism is India's invisible guarantee of freedom. It is the Constitution's way of whispering, never trust power too much, not even your own. If the states weaken, the republic tilts, and when that tilt becomes collapse, the Constitution becomes a script for obedience, not for liberty. Now let's talk about the conclusion, the People's Republic. In the end, federalism is not about center versus the states. It's about the people versus power, because the real subject of federalism is not government, it's governance. It's not about who rules from Delhi, but how power is exercised and where the consent resides. When Delhi dictates what Tamil Nadu teaches, when Lucknow decides what Kerala can eat, when Bengaluru's innovation is throttled by central taxation. When the village panchayat becomes a puppet of state bureaucracy, we must remember what Ambedkar feared most. The real danger to democracy is the tyranny of the majority operating through a centralized state. Centralization is seductive, it looks efficient, it sounds nationalistic, but it is democracy's slow poison. It begins with control, it ends with conformity. India was never imagined as a monolith. It was imagined as a mosaic where every fragment adds color, not confusion. The Constitution calls India a union of states, not a unit, a union. And every union must breathe from both lungs. One in Delhi, the other their states. To suffocate either is to suffocate democracy itself. The future of India depends on whether power learns humility, whether Delhi learns to listen, whether state leaders rise beyond reaction and shape a new federal ethics, not as adversaries but as co-authors of the Republic's next chapter. The Republic, at its best, is a dialogue, not a command. And the Constitution, at its deepest, is a reminder that freedom is safest when power is shared. I am Amod Bidhuri, and this was the next hearing, and this is not just a conversation about federalism. It is a reminder of the republic we were meant to be. Thank you.